on GB News.
A very good morning. It is 9 a.m. You're watching The Briefing with me, Darren McCaffrey. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, a record number of cases across the UK. Yesterday, 80,000 that is expected to keep on growing in the days to come. It means disruption for businesses, with many workers simply not able to turn up, and for places like restaurants and bars where people are now staying at home. They are demanding extra government support, and all this, of course, in the run-up to Christmas. It's not a jolly season, really, is it? If there is some good news, though, it is about the booster programme. A record number handed out yesterday, expecting similar numbers to be released again today. We'll be in Manchester live to find out the latest on that, and we'll be in Dover too, where there are concerns about the number of people potentially going to cross the channel today. That and much more, but first, at 9, here is the news.
Good morning, I'm Tamsin Roberts. This is the news at 9 o'clock. British tourists entering France this Christmas are facing tough restrictions to limit the spread of Omicron. A government spokesperson says they could limit entry to only French nationals, their families, and British citizens living in the country. Travellers from Britain arriving in France will have to self-isolate for 7 days, though isolation will be lifted after 48 hours if their test conducted in France is negative. Full details of the measures are expected to be announced later today. The Chief Medical Officer has warned people to deprioritise certain social events ahead of Christmas to help prevent against the spread of coronavirus. Professor Chris Whitty warned that coronavirus records will be broken a lot over the coming weeks as the Omicron variant surges in the UK. On Wednesday, daily COVID cases hit over 78,000, the highest since the pandemic began. The Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, urged people to take tests before attending events.
Want people to enjoy Christmas safely. There are a whole range of sensible things we can all do to make that happen, including, taking a test before we go out to see people, whether that's friends or family, whether visiting people in their homes, or going out to a pub or bar or restaurant. So there are sensible things that we can all do. We're keeping a close eye on these numbers. We want to make sure we're doing the right thing. We want to make sure we're striking the right balance. And most importantly, we want to make sure that those pressures on the NHS are manageable.
Meanwhile, there are calls for support for the hospitality sector as customers cancel bookings. Some in the industry are predicting significant falls in footfall in December as COVID cases rise. Many customers are now avoiding socialising in the build-up to Christmas over fears of having to isolate. Business groups are calling for an extension of the VAT reduction, which is due to end in March, and for business rates to be deferred. 2 people have been confirmed missing after a block of flats was gutted by a fire in a suspected arson attack. After an extensive search, Thames Valley Police say it does not expect there to be any more survivors in the fire, which started in the early hours of yesterday morning. 1 person has been confirmed dead following the blaze, whilst 4 others were treated in hospital. A 31-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder and arson. 4 children have died and more are badly injured in Australia after strong winds lifted a bouncy castle into the air during end-of-year school celebrations. 2 boys and 2 girls in their final year of primary school died in Tasmania after the children's ride flew away, causing them to fall 10 metres. 5 more children were in hospital, including 1 in a serious condition.
Young children on a fun day out together with their families, and it turns to such horrific tragedy at this time of year. It just breaks your heart.
New research shows that pay rises have increased to their highest level since the summer of last year. Pay analysts, Expert HR, say high inflation rates and ongoing staff shortages have put pressure on employers to increase wages. The research shows that the median basic pay increase was worth 2.2% in the 3 months to the end of November, up from 2% in the previous quarter. Heathrow has been given the green light to increase its passenger charges by more than 50%. The cap on the London airport's price per passenger will go up to over £30 from January the 1st. The current cap is £19.60, with the new figure reflecting uncertainty about recovery in passenger numbers after the pandemic. The charge is paid by airlines but passed on to customers via ticket costs. Channel migrants are being held in very poor conditions after arriving on the Kent coast, despite Home Office assurances of significant improvements. Inspectors found women who had been victims of rape in their home countries weren't adequately supported, and lone children were being held with unrelated adults. A separate assessment also found that injuries, including serious burns, were not detected by staff or properly treated. The Home Office has been contacted on this for a comment. That's all for now. I'll be back with the headlines in half an hour. Now, though, it's back to the point.
A very welcome back to the briefing here on GB News. We are, just over a week out from Christmas, and in many ways, the news couldn't be gloomier this morning. A record number of cases yesterday, 78,610 in the official figures, though the expectation is that that number is almost certainly multiple times higher than that, into the hundreds of thousands, with the expectation now with this virus doubling every 2 days, the Omicron variant across the UK, that there will be a substantial increase in the number of cases in the days to come. Scary numbers is the word that's been used in Whitehall. This is all going to have an effect, not just potentially on hospitalisations, with Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, yesterday suggesting it is nailed on that there will be a substantial increase in hospitalisations in a couple of weeks' time. But also it's going to have a really big impact on the nation's infrastructure. If hundreds of thousands of people are catching the virus every day, it means, frankly, that millions of workers over time will have to take 10 days off, which means that we'll have an impact on trains, on shops, on restaurants, on hospitals, on the police and elsewhere. So, is there any good news? Well, there might be good news in the sense that there is still evidence from South Africa to suggest that the illness seems to be milder. This new variant seems to be milder. We also do not know an awful lot about what the impact might be on hospitalisations and deaths. And in addition to that, the booster programme is being boosted and well underway across Britain, with over 600,000 doses administered yesterday. Let's catch up, though, with what the Prime Minister had to say yesterday. We heard, of course, from Chris Whitty, who suggested that people should prioritise their social events in the run-up to Christmas if they want to spend Christmas with their families. Prime Minister didn't go quite as far as that, but is urging caution.
We're not cancelling events, we're not closing hospitality, we're not cancelling people's parties or their ability to mix. What we are saying is, think carefully before you go. Are you likely to meet people who are vulnerable? Get a test. And I think that is very, very good. Make sure that there's ventilation, wear a mask on transport, and get a test before you go.
That was Boris Johnson speaking yesterday. Well, a little earlier, we spoke to Wes Streeting here on GB News, Labour's Shadow Health Secretary, and asked him whether he thought the advice that the government was providing was good enough.
This variant, the Omicron variant, is spreading fast. In fact, it's spreading faster than any other variant. And the risk here is that whether or not the disease is more severe than other variants, that remains to be seen. Because it's spreading so fast and because it will affect significant numbers of people, even if a smaller proportion of people who get Omicron end up in hospital, it will still be a smaller proportion of a far greater number. And there's a real challenge facing the NHS, both in terms of patients coming through the door and the pressure that places on services, but also on staff who may themselves find themselves off sick and absent, and what that does in terms of care. And that's the single biggest concern we've got, and that's what's driving decision making around the Omicron cases at the moment, and why Parliament voted for a few important restrictions this week. We're listening to the Chief Medical Officer, we're listening to the Chief Scientific Advisor and our own advisors too, and watching the numbers very closely. What I would say to the government and to the country is, as we've shown this week, Labour will put public health before party politics. If further measures are necessary, we stand ready to help so that Boris Johnson can focus on public health and not his own personal political problems. Well, we listen to the Chief Medical Officer, the Chief Scientific Advisor, and to the NHS, and we don't trust Boris Johnson, but we do trust them, and so it seems does the public, because despite what they've seen in recent weeks and the shattered trust and confidence in Boris Johnson, the sense of double standards, the do as I say, not as I do approach of his government, people are listening to what the medical advisors are saying at these press conferences. They're voting with their feet. They're thinking about their own Christmas plans and taking sensible precautions to enjoy Christmas safely this year, which is what we want to see. We've all got a responsibility to the public and to public health, and we've got to try and help the government to do the right thing in a national crisis. I think that's what people want to see. That doesn't mean I'm not going to be sticking the boot into the government on things like NHS waiting times, waiting lists, staff shortages, all of which were big problems before the pandemic, and led me to also say the other day that it's not just that they didn't fix the roof while the sun was shining. It seems like they dismantled the roof and removed the floorboards, and as a result, it's been a lot harder to manage this pandemic. So I will make robust criticisms of the government, but I will do so in a way that's rooted in evidence, and also, treats my colleagues in other political parties as human beings, decent human beings, trying to do the right thing. We'll have disagreements about whether they're doing the right thing, but we'll conduct debate in what I hope will be a more respectful and civilised way than we've seen from Conservative MPs.
There you go. That was Wes Streeting, Labour's Shadow Health Secretary, speaking a little earlier. Two other bits of information today. Again, I don't want to make everyone gloomy, but not necessarily the best of news. Professor Neil Ferguson saying that he reckons that if you've been previously infected with the Alpha or Delta variant, you probably only have a 20% protection against reinfection from Omicron. So just because you've had COVID before, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will be protected against Omicron. That's what he is saying this morning. I know people out there, some of you will be sceptical about what he has had to say in the past, but that is what he is saying. And also news, as we saw in the news bulletin, that France is going to ban all but essential travel, essentially, from the UK to France from Saturday morning. It will only allow people in for compelling reasons because of the Omicron case numbers here in the UK. Well, let's speak to Bill Bowkett. He is a political reporter from Reaction and joins us this morning. Good morning to you, Bill. Let's start, first of all, with that ban from France. Many people would say it is political, given the fact there's already community transmission of the Omicron variant in France, and so these travel bans don't make that much difference. But it is a significant move in the sense of how the UK might be being viewed abroad, given those very high case numbers yesterday.
That very much is the case, Darren, and I think it also part of the growing tensions between the British and the French as well. We're seeing over the last few weeks also over the migrant crisis and also disputes over trade and fishing as well. But I think that is the perception of what a lot of countries have at the moment. A lot of the debate that we're having around Omicron, at least in regards also to South Africa, centres around Britain and how we're seeing, in my view, kind of a lot of mixed messaging between what scientists are saying, in South Africa about the cases being milder, about declining hospitalizations and also protection against vaccine. But you're seeing here in Britain a different approach, a more cautious approach, as we saw last night in the press conference with Professor Chris Whitty and Boris Johnson, sort of urging caution and in Whitty's words, prioritising social gatherings so that families don't have to experience another, nightmare before Christmas as they did last year.
Bill, when we look at the impact of this and that advice that you're talking about, I was out in central London last night. It was pretty quiet. I got the tube in this morning. It was very quiet. I'm sure that's been replicated in towns and cities up and down the country. This is having a big impact already, of course, on restaurants and bars at what should be the busiest time of the year. I must say in the last minute or so, an urgent question's been granted to the Labour Party asking the Chancellor about greater financial support for these businesses. Of course, the Chancellor is in California at the moment. A big political row over that.
He is, although he does maintain, or is I just saying that he's in constant communication with his staff, back in Westminster. But now what we're seeing now is the attention is turning to the plight of businesses, particularly those within hospitality, seeing a wave of cancellations, lost trade. I think the British Pub and Beer Association have said that they're serving fewer pints than normal, and net takings in cities have gone down by a quarter, and I think in the countryside by a tenth. But the Treasury have yet to unveil any big or significant rescue packages, as they already spent billions of pounds during the pandemic, to support businesses during the pandemic. But I feel what's going to happen now is that the government are almost going to be forced to redeploy some of those steps that were taken over the last 2 years to protect workers from misery. So you've had the International Monetary Fund calling for furlough or a mini furlough to be reintroduced. You're also hearing a lot of calls for VAT cuts as well, which will be ending in March, and that to be extended. And you've also seen calls also for Federation of Small Business to increase coronavirus sick pay, because what you're going to see is that with rising infections, they're going to have less staff and put in more precarious positions as well. So, public health is the utmost importance of Cabinet right now, but moving forward new rules without any financial assistance, risks throwing the country's post-pandemic recovery further, of course.
And just very finally, Bill, many people, not everyone, and Chris Whitty didn't go as far as this last night, suggest that further restrictions might be needed. We have to wait for the hospitalisations, of course, in a couple of weeks' time, though someone would suggest maybe that's a little too late. But the further restrictions might be needed. The big question is, could Boris Johnson, if he wanted to or if he needed to, get further restrictions? Could he get it through Parliament, given the size of that rebellion the other night? He's somewhat politically boxed in, some would suggest.
No, he is, Darren, and I don't think he'll be able to do it. You saw, over 100 Tory MPs voting against the Plan B measures, restrictions of liberty, particularly when it comes to the coronavirus passports. And the other thing you're noticing a lot is becoming more evident, at least to the public, is this conflict between the medical experts, members of SAGE and ministers as well. You're seeing Chris Whitty urging Britons to deprioritise their social lives, but then Boris declining to join Whitty, giving public a direct order and instead, asking what he did at the beginning of the pandemic and asking for, more personal responsibility from the public, to get boosted, to reduce contact, to get tested as well. And it's got to be a very convincing case, to introduce Plan C measures or to go further than what the government have already done. And I'm not sure that Tory MPs are totally convinced right now, given the hospitalisation numbers, given also the death toll as well. And I think that is the problem. So I think it's a bit too early to, be talking a lot about these restrictions, given that we need more data. And unless it is able to, Boris Johnson is able to back it up, then Tory MPs won't be able to do it. And if he should then try and force through, further de facto restrictions, then that could cause huge problems going forward for his premiership.
Indeed. Bill, appreciate your time. Bill Bulkett there, a political reporter from Reaction from Hertfordshire. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Let's talk about boosters. For demand is growing for the jab, and there are concerns, though, that people over Christmas, will they be able to get one? Are the numbers going to increase that substantially? I note that 600,000 were delivered here in the UK, 653,000, I think. 1.5 million jabs in people's arms in Germany yesterday. So can the booster programme be boosted even more? What's the view in Manchester? Let's go to our North West reporter, Bradley Harris, who is there for us. What's take-up been like there, Bradley, in your part of the world?
Yeah, well, we heard last night during that press conference with the Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Chief Medical Officer Chris Whitty. OK, we're just... Bradley's mic is clearly not necessarily working terribly well. We'll try and reconnect to that mic if we can. But clearly the government is hoping that lots more people will come forward to get their booster jab in the days to come. Interestingly, of course, last night, Chris Whitty was suggesting that the delay, when you look at the immunity when it comes to the booster jab, in theory, with the first and second dose, it was 2 weeks. With the booster jab, Chris Whitty seems to be suggesting that some of that extra protection kicks in after a week.
according to some of the science in that. We'll reconnect with Bradley in just a couple of minutes with the view from Manchester. But let's move on to another big story today, and that is about migrants in the Channel. And inspectors have reported that migrants are still being held in very poor conditions, despite the Home Office assuring us that they would implement significant improvements. The inspectors' findings highlighted problems, including lone children being held with unrelated adults for days, injuries going untreated and undetected, and women being unsupported after reporting rape. The inspectors were at migrant detention centres in Kent on behalf of the Inspectorate of Prisons and the Dover and Heathrow Independent Monitoring Boards. Well, let's go to our Home Affairs and Security editor, Mark White, who is in Dover for us this morning. Mark, very good morning to you. I believe there are concerns that we could well see quite a significant movement across the Channel again today.
Yes, we are seeing that already. It started actually at 10:30 last night with the first of these small boats pushing off from a beach in northwestern France. It was eventually intercepted first by a French vessel who effectively escorted it into UK waters. Then it was picked up by the Dover lifeboat and those migrants landed here at Dover around about 3 a.m. And since then there have been other incidents, again involving the Dover lifeboat and Border Force vessels. As we speak, there are a number of ongoing incidents in the Channel. We're expecting it to be another significant day of migrant activity. So already today about 65 migrants have been landed here in Dover, but as I say, those other incidents still ongoing, and throughout the day there will inevitably be more sightings. This, Darren, was going to be a real tester for the French authorities, because you'll remember, of course, in the wake of that terrible tragedy in which 27 people lost their lives last month, there was this unedifying row between the British and French governments with finger pointing in both directions, and the French President Emmanuel Macron flatly turning down a British offer from Boris Johnson to provide more in the way of border personnel that could go to France and help supplement the border and policing staff on the beaches along the northwestern coast of France. Well, France said that they could manage themselves, that they would put extra personnel on those beaches. As I say, this is the first big tester, and it looks like quite significant numbers are still managing to leave French shores to head into the Channel for that voyage across to the UK, Darren.
And Mark, what we've got, you just touch on these travel restrictions announced in the last 30 minutes or so from France. This is going to impact, I think, tourism and business travel, but not hauliers, which of course is quite vital. But a reminder, these border restrictions can be kind of chucked up quite quickly and have quite significant impact.
Yeah, I think there will be quite a big impact here in Dover and other ports leading to France. Where we are actually is just by a lorry park down by the harbour, and things, of course, running smoothly at the moment. But I was here last December, round about this time, when the French slapped on restrictions again for travel to and from France. Then, of course, if I remember rightly, it was the Kent variant that was exercising French authorities. They closed off their borders effectively to include hauliers, and that caused some real disruption with many thousands of lorries, some 4,000 in fact, over a number of days, parked all throughout Dover, on the roads leading out of Dover from Kent, heading down towards this port. Eventually they opened up Manston Airport in Kent as an area where thousands of lorries could be parked as well. But there were some really worrying scenes for a while, with lorry drivers going for quite a few days without any access properly to food and water, and some very angry scenes down here then. So at the moment, Priti Patel says that she has been given assurances from her French counterpart that this will not affect hauliers. But as always with coronavirus, as we've seen previously, that can change.
OK, Mark, appreciates your time this morning. That's Mark White, our Home Affairs and Security Editor, joining us from Dover. Well, I promised we would go back to Bradley Harris, who is in Manchester this morning, talking about boosters and the number doled out yesterday, record number here in the UK. Good morning again, Bradley. Hopefully we'll be able to hear you this time. What's the view up there in the northwest? Are people turning up to get their jabs?
Yeah, I've been doing this job for 6 months now. You think I get the hang of it by now, Darren. But yeah, I've come to St Peter's Square in Manchester city centre. I've come here because yesterday I really saw a big reaction to this booster campaign. Huge queues around the town hall, spanning all the way round the tram stop that is behind the camera. Massive queues, hundreds of people waiting to get their boosters, some of which were actually getting their first dose of the vaccine. If you take a look over in Chester, you've got Chester Cathedral. That has been transformed into a walk-in site where army personnel are helping to distribute vaccines to people. Over in Whalley Range Tennis Club, that's in Greater Manchester, they had queues there too on Tuesday when I went to visit that site. Security were actually at the end of the queue, stopping anyone else from joining the walking appointments simply because they didn't have any vaccines left for boosters, that is. Of course, this place where I'm at, the town hall in the city centre of Manchester, is open today from 3 p.m. until 7 p.m. I'm told by security yesterday that there were big queues yesterday and big queues expected again today. The people that I spoke to in the queue yesterday, some were saying that they had turned up and were waiting almost 2 hours just to get their booster jab, but they were saying that they were prepared to wait if it means that they can see their family and friends at Christmas. Of course, we heard last night the Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Chief Medical Officer Chris Whitty saying to prioritise who you're going to meet this Christmas, with the Omicron variant said to be spreading incredibly fast at the moment. They say that boosters are a major way of actually trying to protect yourself from the virus. But many people today, you should expect more people, certainly in parts of the northwest, coming out to get boosted, ready in time for Christmas.
OK, Bradley. Thank you very much indeed, Bradley Harris there, our reporter in Manchester with the latest on the booster campaign. Politics this morning, though, very much on the idea of financial support for industries like hospitality, pubs and restaurants, given the fact that people are staying away. The Night Times Industry Association, where on earth is the Chancellor of the Exchequer? It's quite staggering. We haven't heard a squeak out of Her Majesty's Treasury. The Chancellor needs to come out of hiding. Labour have got an urgent question on this in the Commons at 10:30. Of course, the Chancellor at the moment is on a work trip to California, but clearly he is under pressure, and the government, to stop doling out some money to these businesses now that are being affected by the fact that many people are following Chris Whitty's advice and prioritising what potential events they go to in the run-up to Christmas. OK, that is it for the briefing for today. Tomorrow I'm going to be in Shrewsbury for the results of the by-election in North Shropshire. Back in the studio at 3, though, with the latest politics. Gloria's here at 12. Up next, To The Point, with Mercy and Patrick. But before all of that, here's the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Good morning. Another grey day for the vast majority, but another dry day for most of us as well. There is some rain across northern parts of Scotland that'll only slowly peter out. That's being caused by this weather front, but it's this chunky area of high pressure that's been moving in for the past 24 hours.